Welcome to EconomicZ101, the podcast made for Gen Z by Gen Z, bridging the gap between economics, finance, current events, and our generations, with speakers Vish, Ritam, Sinan, and myself, Mihir. Today, we're going to be talking about the billionaire space race, the infamous battle and solitude between the top billionaires in the world. Branson, Bezos, Musk, fighting to be the first people to commercialize space travel in the world. I mean, it's really interesting, right? Because you look at it from one's perspective, like some people might be history buffs, they're really interesting and like to look at what's happened in the past, but space is like a new frontier. It's really interesting for some people, and especially in the STEM field, it brings a lot of eyes. But on another hand, you can also think commercializing space, really? It's kind of weird to think about because space has always been such a mystery for us, our modern history, and now we're essentially allowing people to pay for their rides into it. It's such an engraved part of who we are, just like how the COVID and the pandemic is taking over our current lives. Back in the 1960s, when Sputnik first hit and got into space, it was a massive, massive step for man. And that's essentially what's happening now. There's a new wave for commercialization and a new wave in technology. I mean, we can start off with generally what is the whole goal of this modern space race and who's taking part of it and what's going on.
Right. So actually, before we go into modern, we'll just take a quick minute to talk about what the space race was back in the latter half of the 20th century. So part of the Cold War between the US and the Soviets, they also partook in a space race to try and reach the moon first to boast the government's technological advancements and also bragging rights over the other nation, right? So because they were always in like a constant like kind of Cold War, as we talked about before. And so this started off with Soviet Sputnik launching on the moon, where they beat the US for landing something on the moon first. Then later on, the US got first man on the moon, etc. Now, this space race is a completely different context. Now, it's about modern billionaires trying to have a long-term competition between private companies to attain further human feats and gain through space exploration, right? So through this, better technology, commercial space travel, things like mining resources from space, multi-planet societies, etc. These are potential outcomes of this space race. And through this, some of the goals that we might want to see from this is like trying to get faster travel or trying to make travel cheaper or even commercializing space, as Mihir said before. But there is also a really big downside because the race can also be just as much as about these eccentric personalities and egoism of some of the world's richest men.
I think Sinan said it perfectly. I feel like more than what it is how it's space travel across worlds. It's literally just an ego battle. You see Jeff Bezos and Richard Branson just fighting over who wants to go to space first. But in the end, you can realize that they just want to be first. They want to be able to like flex.
Yeah, like before with like the Cold War where you had the US and Russia who wanted to be like they were basically seeing who's better. But now you just have it with individuals, so it's not really too much different.
I mean, it's really interesting, right? Because obviously society has morphed and changed so much since the 1960s. Now we have three main characters essentially in this race, with Jeff Bezos from his founding company from Blue Origin, Richard Branson from Virgin Galactic, and Elon Musk from the famous SpaceX. Honestly, it's really cool to see that progression is being made, but it's also a expression of capitalism in a sense. Capitalism is really pushing the boundaries of everything and making sure we can go forward in the fastest means possible. And that's essentially what's happening here. Blue Origin and Virgin Galactic want to commercialize space in a sense, giving people the ability for sum of money in order to see and realize their dreams. While SpaceX is a bit different on that path. While they are essentially trying to create humanity and making it multi-planetary, as Sinan said. It seems to be a more virtuous goal, but there might be some hidden ulterior motives behind there.
Yeah, so 100%, these three billionaires that we're talking about, obviously they have similar goals as well as really divergent goals where one of them wants to commercialize space travel, where the other one wants to have people on different planets in the future. You know, it's space exploration is a really broad topic, but there's also really common and shared goals between these people. So I know one topic that many of us might have heard in the past is like, yo, why don't we like 95% of the ocean is reportedly unexplored, right? So why don't these billionaires and companies like even like NASA, like why don't they invest their money into like ocean exploration? Well, the thing is that like think about it like this. If there was a planetary catastrophe that were to occur like right now, like whether it be a natural disaster, an incoming asteroid, who knows what's going to happen in the future. So if we're trying to put money into ocean exploration, then like what good is that going to have for us? I mean, the ocean's probably going to evaporate in the process if something happens to the Earth. So instead, being able to safely travel to another planet or having humanity thrive on another celestial body is like it's kind of the ideal method of survival.
I mean, it's really, I think you hit it part of the question on the head, but I also think it's just cool, man. Space has so much historical context, whether it be Galileo and the telescope, or figuring out the religious context or the mythological context behind what goes on up in the sky. It's just really interesting to see, and obviously, space and what goes on outside of Earth has been of contention for centuries, millennia even, and other than the ocean, it just seems to be a higher point of contention.
I mean, look, don't get me wrong. I get that, space is cool and all, but like Sinan said, despite the fact that it might not be feasible to like go in the ocean, shouldn't we still find measures and focus a lot more research onto finding more environmental sustainable ways? We need to also protect the earth we live in. We really shouldn't be finding a solution that goes outside our planet. That just makes that just makes sure that like we're bound to leave when we can just stay safe here.
Yeah, I agree with that. With the amount of resources these billionaires have, like it seems like we could make much more of an impact on Earth rather than trying to find like places we can live on in space. So I don't really get the whole, or I personally don't really like the whole like space race thing. But I don't know what your guys' take on is on it.
I mean, there's definitely ups and downs, like which we'll get into later as well. I know, like I can agree with what you said, focusing on environmental factors, because I mean, science shows that like just one rocket launch for 3 or 4 people expends like almost 200 to 300 tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, and obviously we know that like that's really bad, especially for things like climate change and other aspects.
I think it's really interesting that you put it that way, right? Because climate change and being an environmentalist in the current years is really important considering the toll that humans have taken on Earth. And it's sort of interesting, right? Because we're trying to push this form of excellence and growing past and even passing new frontiers as space, right? But to me, it's really interesting that we're leaving all our mess on Earth and trying to expand so far that we aren't can't even stay forward. And part of me believes that it's too idealistic, but I'm trying to understand, and I think I've come to the conclusion that money makes the world go round, and eventually it's going to make rockets go into space, and that's what's happening. We're moving towards privatization, gentlemen, and in the coming decades and centuries, we're definitely going to see other aerospace companies rise to fame, whether it be privatized companies like the billionaire space race that's happening now, or state-run government programs and trying to get people up in space.
I think the second man who entered the moon, Buzz Aldrin, he had something to say about that. When it came to, I believe, Elon Musk's SpaceX plan, he was talking about how it didn't make sense, how it was more of a magnificent desolation, and that it really negatized the feelings that those who went to space in general, who trained for it, it basically ruined that. What do you guys think about that?
I mean, it's really interesting, right? Because obviously, when it happened in 1960s with Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong, there was a massive political and global battle between the powers at the time, the Soviet Union and America, and trying to get out. And part of that was, I want to be the first onto a new frontier. I want to expand the fastest, and I want to be the greatest. And I think that's a major part of how space exploration has grown even now, and why privatization has taken place. People like Buzz Aldrin were probably really invested in their craft. They love doing what they did, and they're extremely proud for being the first people on the moon. But now, space is getting turned into a commercial landscape where people can pay 250 grand for Blue Origin, Bezos' company, to go into space. And it's really interesting that billionaires are trying to create a new market and monopolize it. And I think it's as much as I can say it's scummy, and I personally think it's just really disgusting, but that's what goes on in this world, and capitalistic mindset is going to keep it that way.
I mean, I remember there's this fun fact I just heard recently on the news. So the 18-year-old who went on Bezos's space flight, he never even used Amazon, which is pretty interesting, knowing that he went into Amazon's ship.
I mean, it's kind of crazy because someone who has absolutely no care for how things work, or connection or passion for space, can throw up a lump sum of money and just get there. But I mean, as much as we've been dogging on the way that things have been working, there are net positives, and there's our objectives that can fall out and figure out that something good is going on here, right? People wanting to go to space. It's been such a point of contention for so long, and finally we have the technology and the prowess to actually make it happen. This is such a big milestone for the human race, and students all across the world are getting to live in a time where something like this is possible, especially with the emergence of STEM and science and technology being such a prominent part of the common society. Something like this is a major motivator for people entering that field.
Yeah, I feel like with, like you were saying before, how this could create a new market with a new, like, since there's so many people dumping a large amount of money into space travel, then like tickets just to go into space are like millions of dollars. So if we somehow get jobs and ways for people to work while they're in space, it can like definitely boost our economy in general. And I feel like this whole thing has so many different job opportunities, which could be very exciting if it all turns out to work.
So I just want to add something, like creating with new economies. I know I can relate this to, like, when airplanes were starting to become a new popular thing, right? Before, airplanes and jets were mainly used on the battlefield in wars, right? These were like high speed weapons that were able to cause catastrophic destruction over other people's boundaries, right? But through this, people realized, whoa, we can turn this into we can commercialize it into just public travel. Like literally nowadays, you can book a flight and go wherever you want. So I think when we say that like people are creating a new economy by dumping the amount of time and money into these different corporations, these different ideas, then it might be possible to make something cost effective for the public to use that can benefit our society.
And I think, okay, that was a great point too. I think Mihir also said another great point. This can indirectly cause more people to focus more on STEM-related careers, knowing that there's another branch of science in space that they can explore. That seems like something a lot more people will be interested on. And it's not just the space itself. Manufacturing, the 3D printing that goes into creating these spaceships and everything. A lot more people will be so interested in that.
I can definitely agree. Being on this new frontier, and with so much technologization that's happening right now, I think as a group of people, and people who are interested in the way that this space race is currently going out, I think if we tolerate this brief form of billionaire public relations sideshow and just form of publication, the long-term private investments that eventually will translate into economic impact will probably gratify something and create a good product. We also have to keep in mind, though, there are negatives to it, as the increased commercialization and the lack of care for what's actually going on Mother Earth might come at might come back to bite us in the future. I mean, negatives are plenty and all, but like there are probably a lot of negatives that this has to do with the Earth and what's going on here, right?
Yeah, speaking of negatives, this whole like fad with I mean, I really shouldn't call it a fad because there's a lot of economic opportunity coming with the whole space race, but it's causing a lot of, excuse my profanity, but shitty effects on Earth because there's so much pollution involved with like rocket launches. Because not only is there effects that happen with the large amount of heat created from rockets to launch, and the suit created from that, and how it goes into the atmosphere and starts creating holes due to the heat. And there's also stuff that happens with the gases reaching in the upper part of the atmosphere and again creating gaps and adding more ozone to our atmosphere. It's if we have more and more people going into space, these effects just become greater and greater because, like, I think it was Sinan who said this before, 200 to 300 tons of carbon dioxide go when just four people go into space. So if this becomes more commonplace, then when just like a few hundred people go into space, we have like almost like thousands of tons of carbon going into the atmosphere, which is like unreal.
So this is basically something I said before. Instead of focusing on wasting carbon dioxide and basically harming the environment, what we should be doing instead is focusing more on the planet we live in, focusing on ways to replenish water, find ways to sustain ourselves for a long run instead of focusing on these things.
I can definitely agree with that, right? There's a lot of bad stuff happening down here, right? Whether it be in first world countries like America, but also conflict sectors of the world with tons of conflict. I mean, we've pointed out that these billionaires are putting tons of assets and money into space technology that is investing into making our life better, and but it also has environmental impact. I mean, I think that a lot of this, even though there is environmental issues, there's commercial support and purpose to it. I think that a lot of this is billionaires trying to put forward their endeavors and putting forward their personal goals and trying to realize it because of the massive growth and control that they have, right? Let's think about this for a second. People with capital are people that run the world, especially in the mixed economy that America performs under. People with money, like people like Bezos, Musk, and Branson, with their assets and the wealth that they have, creating a new sector and a new frontier that has so much eyes on it. I mean, when a SpaceX rocket launches, man, there's a million people watching it across the world. Millions, more than that. And the thing is, these billionaires, even though they have worked hard at the fruition of their jobs to and creating the companies that are everlasting till now, they're taking advantage of the working class and using their efforts to fund their beliefs and further privatizing a future market.
And not only that, but these billionaires are also trying to find sponsors from other companies to finance their explorations. And they pour so much money into something that would really take like decades or even centuries for the benefits to reap.
I mean, I completely agree with that, right? Because these billionaires, their efforts are coming to fruition at an early stage, and even state programs like NASA are in support of it, right? These state programs, which have massive, massive budgets to push forward and get their work done, they can now use these private companies to push their agenda, whether it's getting research done on new planets like Mars or pushing forward their rovers and gaining new intel. This new sector and new market will probably in a century be one of the biggest ones on Earth. And these billionaires, by creating a standstill and creating this new market and dumping money into it, are only going to get richer and richer.
I mean, if there's one thing that, I mean, despite my my concerns of the fact that the climate crisis are being neglected, I feel as though it's crazy to know that Jeff Bezos was once this simple, ordinary man in a garage basement selling books, and now he's literally flying in space.
It's definitely insane because growth is something that's so unprecedented, right? And we touched on this a little earlier in the podcast about how capitalism and this whole economy funds growth to the point that it gets addicting, obsessive even. And it's coming to fruition now, right? Regardless of the issues, anything that's happening in on Earth, right? People want to push so far ahead that they're willing to leave what's going on. The quality of life in America, the amount of poverty, the issues done to certain racial communities. There's so much that's going on, and billionaires can put forward their funds, but instead of living in the moment and improving life, especially considering the massive amount of control that you have with the wealth that you own, so much of it could be used for social programs and improving what's going on here. I mean, Musk company SpaceX wants to make something, and humanity in general, multi-planetary. Think about that, right? It's absolutely insane how much exploration has gone and how much expansion is just creeping into the minds of everyone. It's cool, right? But maybe let's start thinking about what's going on at the bottom ranks of our social hierarchies and helping out quality of life in general.
You know, there's a good saying that has something to do with this. So a lot of people say that life is always easier to manage when there's a balance between certain things. But when we try to gain too much of something, it harms us in the end. Like, for example, this doesn't have to do with the space race, but with food surpluses. Food surpluses are when like you have like way too much food to distribute, and basically more people actually die from this than food scarcity. You know, it's crazy that like when you have too much of something, it ends up harming other people rather than just having the benefit of, oh, you have enough for this. And then, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's kind of a common thing that goes around in society.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like with the whole space race, I think if this whole thing is successful, we could literally have an abundance of like space, which sounds kind of stupid when I say it out loud, but I feel like it would overwhelm everyone on Earth with like being able to go through different planets if we can somehow pull that off. Like it would just get really complicated, and unless we were able to make like travel, like I don't even know how fast we would have to go, but it just seems like something that could definitely overwhelm everyone's daily lives and how we function now, like in general.
I mean, Vish, I completely agree, right? The scope of trying to understand how much is out there and how much we're trying to harness, it's kind of scary at one point. And I'm thinking, let's dream of this final frontier by all means, but let's focus our minds on the quintessentially earthly priorities, right? Affordable healthcare, decent homes for the poorest in society, a solid education for our kids, and reversing the decade-long precarities in the livelihoods for the frontline workers, the ones who are saving our lives, especially in a pandemic, which is threatening the way that we work. Regenerating the devastating loss for the natural world is part of the environmentalists are focusing on so heavily, and replacing a frenetic form of consumerism with an economy of care and relationship and meaning, right? We have to try to live in the moment. And even though the space race is cool and space is cool, let's try to keep it down where we are.
Eat the rich.
Yeah, that too. I mean, guys, and this is our 8th edition of the podcast. We talked about the billionaire space race today, and I think I got really invested in, man. This is something really cool, and I'm something I'm really passionate about. And hopefully we can talk about something that you guys want to talk about. Leave comments. Tell us what we should talk about for the future. This has been us. 3rd podcast in a week, and we're keep on this pace for the remainder of August. Thank you for your support as always. This has been us. It's me here. Thank you so much.